You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, everybody. It is a brand new day here on the podcast in Columbus at Ohio State. Ryan Day, the new Ohio State head football coach, will be taking over on January 2nd for the now retired Urban Meyer. I'm your host, Kyle Lamb, and here on Unscripted Ohio, brought to you by Buckeye Grove, we sure have a lot of things to talk about today. Of course, we're going to talk Urban. That is the big story here. Ryan Day taking over. A lot of speculation, a lot of rumor mongering, a lot of chatter the past several weeks about, will Urban step down? Will he retire? And it turns out that that is, in fact, what happened. He will coach his last game in the Rose Bowl against Washington, and then Ryan Day will take over. And I want to talk about what this means, what I think will happen going forward with Ryan Day, and I kind of want this to also be a little bit of a retrospective, because Urban is a legend. He will be known as a legend. He will be remembered as a legend, and it's really incredible what he's done, and I'd kind of like to reflect a little bit on that, but also give my thoughts on Ryan Day taking over. I want to talk a little bit of basketball too, and that kind of pales in comparison today, but Chris Holtman's squad keeps rolling along. A big road win at Illinois after the easy win they had at home last week against Minnesota. Luther Muhammad is back very quickly from his dislocated shoulder, and the Buckeyes are now 8-1. And I want to talk a little basketball here later in the show. Like I said, it's the small focus today, given what we have to talk about. But Ohio State looks like a Big Ten title contender, and I will tell you why I think that they are now a legitimate contender to win the Big Ten title. But so what? Where do you start with this Urban thing? I mean, first, it goes without saying, Urban is a legend. He, wound up, he's going to wind up either 82-9 or 83-10 in his career at Ohio State. It's just incredible what he has done. I mean, when you look at everything, and he's going to go down as one of the greatest coaches of all time, not just at Ohio State. I mean, you could definitely say he's as good as there's ever been at Ohio State, which is saying a lot. Paul Brown, Woody Hayes, Jim Tressel, there are some great coaches that have coached at Ohio State, but his overall record, 186-32. He's 54-4 in the Big Ten. His record in rivalries has been incredible. In 16 years, he's only lost, I think, 4 times to his rivals. He'll finish 7-0 against Michigan. But I think, to me, the stat that really jumps out the most, and I posted this on Twitter last week, it's the fact that he won 74% of his games, or he has won 74% of his games against ranked opponents in his entire career, not just at Ohio State, but his entire career. He's won 74% of his games, and that is the best in the history of college football in the AP poll era, which dates all the way back to 1936. 74% of his games played against ranked competition, he has won. And there are many coaches in this business that could only dream of winning 74% of all of their games, let alone against ranked opponents. When you're replacing a guy like Urban, this is big shoes to fill for anybody. And there are a lot of people that are a little anxious to see what Ryan Day does as head coach. And, so I said on Buckeye Grove, on the Horseshoe Lounge in October, when some of these rumors were going around, I said that there is some truth to Urban. I mean, he does have medical issues. He did not deny those, obviously. He came out and was pretty upfront about that back in October. And he did that for a reason, because I think he knew where he was at with his headaches. I think he knew where he was at with his condition. He knew that it was going to be difficult for him to continue going on. And I think that's why he came out. I mean, in one regard, I think he was just trying to clear the air and be upfront and honest. But I think he was also laying the groundwork because he knew there was a possibility that he would step down. And if he stepped down, he did not want to be accused of running away from Ohio State's problems or running away from his own problems. And, that was something that really plagued him perception-wise. And when he left Florida, he left for medical reasons. He left for his health issues. But it doesn't stop the perception after the fact, by people that, he was, especially because he got back into coaching so quickly. There are those that said, well, he ran away because the cupboard was bare at Florida and he saw a bad season coming and he wanted to get out. And look, that was just simply not true. That's not why Urban stepped down. But it's become a part of his reputation. It's become a part of his past. And I don't think he wanted that to happen at Ohio State this time around. I don't think he wanted to be accused of running away from the issues. I think that's why he put this out back in October, because he knew there was a real chance he might step down. And so he just said, I think he was straightforward about that. And so I think he planted the seeds a little bit to show that if he decided to retire, that was the reason he was retiring and not for any of these other reasons. Not because he was unhappy with the Ohio State administration, not because he was forced out. Those conspiracy theories, they just don't hold any water here. But I said in October that, there was a real chance of Urban walking away from this. But I said a decision had not been made. And that is true, despite what people think, well, this was in the works for a long time. No, what they said at the press conference was legit. The decision had been made, within 48 hours, right around the time of the Big Ten championship, winning at Northwestern. I think Urban said finally, I think he came to his own solution, or came to his own peace, that he could live with the decision of walking away. And I think this was a good time to do it, winning against Michigan for a 7th straight time and winning the Big Ten title and going into the possibility of walking away with a 13-1 Rose Bowl winning season. I think that's a great time to walk away for him. He's won a national championship. He'll finish 7-0 against Michigan. He'll have won 3 Big Ten titles. You add the Rose Bowl here to the mix, and it is a perfect time, I think, for Urban Meyer to walk away. I said, though, at the time, back in October, I said if anything happens with this, I think Matt Campbell, head coach at Iowa State, is going to be the guy to look for, because Gene Smith had his eye on him. Gene Smith, remember, used to be an AD at Iowa State, and he didn't work with Matt Campbell, but he's still got contacts at Iowa State. He's very familiar with Campbell's work. And, I just hear so much positive talk about Campbell. He's a lot like Urban. He's really intense. He's a great motivator. He's going to be a superstar coach. And I said at the time I thought Campbell was the odds-on favorite. And I'm not the only one that thought that. Remember, there was this there were these odds that came out from a sports book back in October who would be the Ohio State head coach in 2019. And Urban Meyer and Matt Campbell were basically dead even. At the time, I think Ryan Day was, I believe, 10-1 odds of being the head coach, which surprised a lot of people that Day was not ahead of Campbell at the time. But I said, I was hearing that Campbell was kind of the guy that Gene Smith was looking at. And look, if you go back to the press conference here this week, Gene, said up front in the press conference, he said back in October after, I started having these conversations with Urban because they were having weekly chats and he was giving them updates. He basically said, I started the process of looking at candidates back in October, and he did. And what happened between then and now, from what I understand, is basically, look, Urban went to bat for Ryan Day. Urban thinks that Ryan Day is going to be a total rock star, okay? He thinks he's going to be a superstar in the coaching industry and thinks he's got the chops to be one of the great ones. And Gene got to know Ryan a lot better, and Urban thinks the world of Ryan Day. And so it just started making so much sense. And so even if you're kind of like me, where maybe all things being equal, you prefer Matt Campbell over Ryan Day just because Matt Campbell's a little more established. The fact is, things are not all equal, and I think Ryan Day has an advantage because, look, he's being given the keys to a Ferrari here, and basically being asked not to wreck it. But that is a big advantage because he already has the Ferrari. He doesn't have to throw money down to buy a new car. He's already got the car in front of him. If Matt Campbell comes in, maybe Matt Campbell does really well in a few years, but you're going to have the issue of losing some recruits, losing coaches. You're going to have to kind of start the recruiting process from scratch. You're going to have to relearn relationships. Ryan Day is in a situation, he doesn't have to do any of that. He's got the established relationships in the state of Ohio. He knows the coaches. He has Urban Meyer, who's going to be sticking around the next month, and he can go to bat for Ryan with recruits, which, by the way, that's a huge thing. Some of these coaches, some of these recruits you're seeing decommit in the 2020 class, which, by the way, next week, I'll have Mark Gibler on, and we'll kind of touch base about the recruiting angle of all this. But some of these recruits you see that are walking away from their commitments right now with Ohio State, they're still going to be in contact with the Ohio State coaching staff, and Urban Meyer will still be around to recruit. He will still be able to go to bat for Ryan Day, and that's something that would not necessarily happen if Matt Campbell were taking in. So this is coming into the job. So that's another advantage that Ryan Day has here, is he has Urban Meyer who will be sticking around to go to bat for him. And I think that's really big. So, Ryan, look, I think Ryan has all the makings of being a great head coach. And my preference for Matt Campbell had nothing really to do against Ryan Day. It's just I think Matt Campbell is a tremendous motivator. And although the recruiting angle is less of a known quantity with him, we don't know how he's going to do at Ohio State. I mean, we don't know how Ryan Day will do either. I think Ryan Day has an advantage in that he's already proven himself as an assistant coach as a pretty good recruiter, and I think that's going to carry over. And that's why I think this is a no-brainer. I think it became a no-brainer when you have Urban going to bat for a guy like that. Look, Ryan Day has the pedigree. He's going to do well at Ohio State, and I know this is crazy to say because I just cited all those stats for you early on in the show. 82-9 under Urban Meyer, 54-4 in the Big Ten. What he's done, 7-0 against Michigan. All those stats I cited for you. It's almost impossible to take over for a legend. Step in those shoes and live up to those expectations. But look, this is just my gut feeling, and I actually think that the train is going to keep rolling under Ryan Day. I don't think they're going to miss a beat, and it's because I think Ryan Day is a future superstar, and I think the ability to take over the program as it is and retain a lot of the assistants, especially the key glue guys to the program, Mickey Marotti, Mark Pantoni, Larry Johnson, some of these keys to the success that Ohio State has had, he's going to be able to retain that support system. And I think they're going to go in next year. It's going to depend, obviously, a lot on what happens at the quarterback situation. Does Dwayne Haskins return, or will they hand over the keys to Tate Martell or Matthew Baldwin? Offensively, there are going to be a lot of question marks going into that next season based on what happens with the quarterback situation. But Ryan Day is going to take over with a lot of talent. He's going to win a lot of games. I just think his personality wins out in the end, and I think the recruiting will speak for itself. And who knows if he recruits like Urban Meyer? I think that is the key question, because you think back to what Jim Tressel did. When Jim Tressel was at Ohio State, he recruited well, but he did not recruit like Urban Meyer recruits. And that's the difference between Jim Tressel's program, which was very, very successful, and Urban Meyer's program, which was on another level. That's going to be the difference with Ryan Day, how he recruits, I think, because I think he's got the offensive mind. I think he's going to run the program with a lot of consistency. I think everybody was very impressed with what we saw out of Ryan Day for the first 3 weeks of this season when he was handling things, the way he handled practice, the way the team was ready coming out to start the season. I think all of that is not an issue. Does he recruit like Jim Tressel? Does he recruit like Urban Meyer? Does he recruit somewhere in between? That for me is going to be the difference with Ryan Day. And if you think about it, look, that was the same thing with Jim Tressel. I mean, if you think about when Jim Tressel took over the program, Tressel had already been established as a coach at on the FCS level. And even though he has a lot more experience than Ryan Day has, there were still some questions with Tressel. You think back, everybody was like, well, great, this guy is a proven coach, but is he going to be able to recruit at this level? And at the end of the day, talent is what's going to matter. You can be a great coach, but if you don't recruit, you're not going to win. Talent is the most important thing. Coaching, I'm not saying it's not important, but talent wins out. Jim Tressel at Youngstown State, when he took over, had won 70% of his games. He had won 4 Division I AA national titles. Now it's FCS, but 4 Division I AA national titles back then. He had lost 2 other times. Youngstown State had that big rivalry with Marshall every year. That was a great rivalry, by the way. If you guys, those of you not old enough to remember, Youngstown State Marshall, one of the just absolute best rivalries in college football, considering how many times they met in the 1AA championship. But when Tressel was hired by Ohio State, which was out of the blue, I don't think anybody really expected that could ever happen. They knew there was the reports that he had interviewed, but I don't think anybody thought that Tressel would actually get the job. But it wasn't a matter for him of whether he could coach. It was whether he was going to be able to recruit at a high enough level. And the recruiting was good, especially at the start. It kind of tailed off at the end. They just weren't landing the out-of-state 5 stars very consistently. And you saw that in the results. They were good at the end, but not necessarily dominant. And I think that's going to be the telltale sign of whether Ryan Day makes it. And I think he will. I really do. I think you're going to see a guy that gets it. He knows his strengths. He knows his flaws. He's going to not be afraid to ask for help. He's got the personality that I think Ohio State fans are absolutely going to love. This guy gets it. I'm telling you, Ryan Day is going to keep this program on top. Are they going to win 90% of their games under Ryan Day? Probably not. Are they going to continue to win 100% of their games against Michigan? Probably not. But I think that the overall results, the Big Ten titles, the national championship, the playoff bids, the contention, being in contention for a national title, I think all of those things are going to be on a very comparable level, and I just don't think there's going to be a drop-off from Urban Meyer to Ryan Day. I'm very anxious and interested to see where this goes, because I do believe in Ryan Day. I do believe giving him the keys and handing this program to him now makes a lot of sense. I know some people prefer a national coaching search, but look, based on what I see of the people available, even if Matt Campbell is your best choice, which I think in most years would be a good choice, I think Ryan Day, with the ability to take over as is, I think that is your best choice. And I think you would find that in a national search. And even if they didn't have a national search, Gene Smith did background on candidates already. He said that in October he was already studying other candidates. So it's not like he didn't do any due diligence here. He went to the drawing board, he did some research on candidates, and he determined, hey, this is our best choice. Sticking with Ryan Day, making him the next head coach, this is the best the program can do. And I agree with him. I think this is the right choice. I think Ohio State fans are going to be very happy with the choice, and it's going to pay dividends. It'll be very weird to not see Urban Meyer around as head coach. I think he will stick with the program and have some sort of role with the athletic department at least. I think you'll see him around, but it'll be weird after all these years. It's only been 7 years. It feels like it's a lot longer. It's only been 7 years. But even after 7 years, it will be strange not having Urban Meyer around. So, look, I want to get into this much more. Like I said, next week we'll have Mark Gibler in. We'll talk a little bit about the recruiting angles. I know people are sweating this out. There have been some 2020 decommitments. And a couple new commitments along the way, new visits along the way too. But we'll get into all that next week with Mark. We'll talk to Ross next week. What can you expect from Ryan Day's teams offensively? Will there be much of a change? Of course, we'll continue to monitor the coaching aspect, the assistant coaching aspect of this. We'll look at who's coming back for Ohio State, because we still don't know if Kevin Wilson will be back. We don't know if Greg Schiano will be back, Bill Davis, Alex Grinch. He's been linked to the Oklahoma job as possible DC there. There's a lot here to digest. We'll continue to monitor that next week, and I promise we'll stay ahead of that. So we'll get the recruiting angle, the coaching angle. Of course, we'll continue to preview Ohio State, Washington the next several weeks. And remember, Dwayne Haskins in the Heisman Trophy candidate, or in the Heisman Trophy presentation on Saturday night. Haskins, by the way, has no chance in this. Let's just be honest. He just doesn't. I saw a sports book have the odds out here on this. I think Kyler Murray was minus 105 to win. I think Tua was plus 140, something like that. And Haskins was plus 2,900, which means you put down $100 to have a chance at winning $2,900. Seems like a great bet, but to be honest with you, at those odds, I would say stay away from it, because it's probably a sucker's bet. They probably know Haskins isn't winning, or they don't put those kind of odds on it. So I would say stay away from that, despite the appeal to put down $100 to win $2,900. But Haskins doesn't have a chance, but we will talk about that on Monday as well. We'll talk about the Heisman Trophy winner, and I'm sure it's going to be Kyler Murray, and I think Tua will finish second and Haskins third, but we will reflect on his great season on Monday as well. So a lot to talk about coming up here as we preview Ohio State, Washington in the coming weeks, and the guys from SECfans.com, Daniel and Josh, will be along here sometime this month as we also not only preview Ohio State, Washington, but I would like to talk a little bit about the college football playoff, and we'll preview those games as well. So plenty to talk about here, and I promise we will have more on Ryan Day as the month goes along.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
Speaking of really successful Ohio State coaches, let's talk some Ohio State basketball, because, folks, I got to tell you, if you are not on the basketball bandwagon, if you are not on a fan of Chris Holtmann yet, which I can't imagine there aren't anybody listening that's not even a quasi-basketball fan that isn't a fan of Chris Holtmann, but if you are not on the bandwagon, you need to jump right on, because you are going to be late to the station if you don't get on right now. Because I got news for you. Look, Ohio State is 8-1, and I'm not saying they're a perfect basketball team. I know people were a little edgy after the Syracuse loss because they did not look very good. Offensively or defensively, they didn't look very good. They were a little unlucky defensively, but offensively, they just didn't handle the zone. But I'm telling you, I said it then, and I'm saying it again now, especially after wins over Minnesota and Illinois. That game against Syracuse was an aberration. I told you on the podcast last week, I said, erase that, burn it from your memory. Erase that game because it doesn't mean anything. Ohio State was a little bit on the unlucky side. Ironically, they followed it up against Minnesota. Minnesota was 0 of 13 from three-point range, so they were a little bit on the lucky side in that game. A lot on the lucky side, actually. But nonetheless, that Syracuse game, it was such an aberration. And Ohio State, look, against Illinois, they looked terrible in stretches. They did not look real committed to the defensive side of the basketball in the first half. I thought they came out a lot of energy in the second half. They did not handle Illinois' pressure, and Illinois is among the top 5 in the country in forcing turnovers on defense as far as turnover percentage of possessions that wind up in turnovers. So this Illinois defense, they've been doing that to teams all year. Now they only have a 2-7 record now, but they've had a really tough schedule. They faced Gonzaga, they faced Iowa State, they faced Xavier, they faced Nebraska. They've been Georgetown. They've had a really, really tough schedule so far. So their 2-7 record is a little bit misleading. They've got a lot of talent. In fact, their entire roster is expected to be back next year. This is going to be a pretty good team. They're not a good team right now. They're very undisciplined. They foul a lot, which is somewhat part of their defensive pressure. That's going to be a byproduct. But, this is a decent team that Ohio State beat on the road, despite their record. But look, they did not look good in the first half. They turned it over way too much. C.J. Jackson really struggles against ball pressure. They just don't have a lot of great ball handlers on the team. That, along with the lack of size and length up front, are their two biggest issues. I think the ball handling and taking better care of the basketball is something that they can improve upon as the season goes along. The size and length is obviously something that is just not going to change. You're not going to be able to improve on that. But look, I'm watching the Ohio State team here through 9 games. They're 8-1 now. They've got road wins at Illinois, in Chicago. They've got a road win at Creighton, a road win at Cincinnati, a big home win against Minnesota. I'm looking at this team, and I am seeing a team that is going to potentially compete for a Big Ten title this year. And I know that's crazy to think, because for as outlandish as it was at the start of last year to think that team would finish 1 game away from a Big Ten title, then you see Keita Bates-Diop put on the season he had last year and then go to the NBA, you really would not have said that they'd be a Big Ten title contender this year. Remember, they were picked 8th in the league to start the season, and some people had them as low as 11th or 12th. But now here you are. They're 2-0 in the Big Ten. Everybody has played 2 Big Ten games. It'll be a couple more weeks before the Big Ten slate picks back up. But Ohio State is one of 5 undefeated teams in the league right now, with Indiana, Michigan, Michigan State, and Wisconsin. And I'm watching these teams play, and I got to tell you, Michigan is playing the best. Michigan State probably has the most talent. But this Ohio State team is right there. I like Nebraska, who's 1-1. They blew a game at Minnesota the other night that they should have won. They were up double digits in the second half. I like that Nebraska team as well, though. I think Nebraska, along with those 5 teams, and maybe Purdue, are potential Big Ten title contenders. But, I said on the podcast early in the year, you may remember this, I said Ohio State, mark my words, I think this team finishes a top 10, maybe top 15 or top 20 adjusted defense when all is said and done. That is defensive efficiency adjusted for competition, points per possession or points per 100 possessions. Well, you look at the Ken Pomeroy ratings now on KenPom.com. They are now 16th in the country in adjusted defensive efficiency, which is points per 100 possessions. And the thing about Pomeroy's ratings is he is still regressing and taking into account preseason expectations, which they started 47th in defense, expected defense at the start of the season in Pomeroy's algorithm. So what that means is if they are 16th and he's still regressing for preseason expectations, they are actually better when you only use this year's data. They're actually a top 10 adjusted defense right now. So my prediction of where this team would end has already come true. That's where they are right now. That doesn't mean that they will stay that way, but usually a team like that has figured out the defense will continue to play defense really, really well, and sometimes at even a higher level as the season goes along. So they are already getting there defensively. They still have some work to go. They're not perfect. I thought they overhelped a little bit in the first half against Illinois on Wednesday night. I think that will rectify itself. I think by the end, this team is going to be very good defensively. But what I like about it, what I've seen through 9 games, is I see an offense that, despite its lack of size up front, I see a team that shows signs of being really good by the season end. At point guard, they've got to get more consistent production out of C.J. Jackson, but what I do like about that is that Keyshawn Woods has really stepped up and stabilized the team. He's made some big plays for Ohio State when Jackson has been off, but they need both of those guys to play more consistently. Luther Muhammad, of course, coming back from a dislocated shoulder after just 1 week. That's an incredible recovery. He's going to be a guy that they're going to get more production, but what I really like to see, and this is why I think the team is going to continue improving, and I think they have a chance to be in the conversation for the Big Ten championship. You look at a guy like Musa Jallow. Remember last year as a freshman, he came in, he was just 17 years old. He was supposed to be a high school senior. He graduated early, enrolled at Ohio State 1 year ahead of time, 1 year early, okay? So he could jump right in and help Chris Holtman's era get off to a start. They had a smaller roster. They didn't have a lot of depth. They really needed Musa as another body. And he comes in, he's young, he's inexperienced, he needs more time in the weight room, more experience. He's gotten that, and now you're starting to see it slowly within the last 2 games especially. You're seeing that confidence build. He's becoming more assertive, more aggressive. He's taking shots confidently. He's getting into his shooting motion. He's going to the rim. He's got to finish a little better at the rim. He has missed some layups and some dunks. He's got to finish better. But I tell you what, this guy is really putting it together. In the last 2 games, he's played a total of 43 minutes, and he's scored 22 points on 13 shots. He has 13 rebounds on top of that. He's really becoming a great rebounder for Ohio State, and he's slowly becoming a scorer. You add in the improvement that Kyle Young has made. He's improved by leaps and bounds from last year. With him and Caleb Wesson becoming a consistent post presence. Dwayne Washington, of course, is a scorer. He's got to be more consistent on the defense end. But you add in all these guys, and I tell you what, this is looking like a team that is going to be there defensively. The numbers are already there on the defensive side of the basketball. But by the end of the season, I'm telling you, it's going to be the second straight year we're saying it. You just can't believe where this team is at. Chris Holtmann has a knack for getting guys to play to their ability, focusing on their strengths. You got to realize the strengths and weaknesses of your players, and that's part of coaching, and Chris Holtmann does that very, very well. He puts his guys in a position to succeed, but he's recruited great players, and of course, Thad had some really good guys that wanted to win, but he was lacking that from certain guys on the roster, and that's where Chris has come in, and I think he's got that from the entire roster now. He's got an entire roster of guys that want to win, that's working hard, and not taking plays off. And you can see it. You watch them play. They're so fun to watch because they're energetic. They are athletic, but they're energetic, and they're constantly diving for loose balls. They're making the little plays over the course of a game. Even when the shots aren't falling, maybe they're not playing great defense, there's no quit in these guys. And that's going to be a staple, I think, of Chris Holtmann's program. I think you're going to continue seeing this. And even last year when they finished 1 game out, they shouldn't have been in the hunt for a Big Ten title, but they were anyway. I think this year they probably shouldn't have been in the hunt for a Big Ten title, but it looks like they're going to be. I'm not saying that they're going to win it. That's still a long way off, but they're playing like a team that I think is going to be in the race for a Big Ten championship. And I don't have to tell you because I've talked about it on the podcast. Next year, they got help coming. DJ Carton, Alonzo Gaffney, E.J. Liddell, C.J. Walker, the transfer point guard from Florida State. They've got 4 guys coming next year. Walker is there this year practicing, but they got 4 guys coming that's going to show up next year, and that team is going to be really good. But jump on the train now because I tell you what, these guys are so fun to watch. They're so disciplined. They really enjoy playing basketball for each other. They enjoy winning. They're an infectious group, and this Ohio State basketball team is going places. I've said so many times on this show that next year is going to be a lot of fun, and they're going to be really good. But it's starting to become apparent it's too soon to discount this year because they are playing like a team that will be in the race this year and have a chance to win a Big Ten title. So, Chris Holtmann, I'm telling you, be very thankful for this guy. He is a great basketball coach. What can I say? Ohio State is very lucky to be able to be in a situation for, it's funny, we talk about football. Ohio State's in a great position. Even though Urban Meyer is retiring, they're very fortunate to have a guy like Ryan Day ready to take over. But the basketball program, what can you say? You went from Thad Matta, probably, if not the greatest coach ever at Ohio State, he's right there with Fred Taylor. But if he's not the greatest, he's certainly right there with Fred Taylor. But then they go out and get Chris Holtmann, and Chris Holtmann just doesn't skip a beat. 15-3 in the Big Ten in his first season, goes to the NCAA tournament, gets to the second round, and now here in a season that was supposed to be a rebuild, they're 8-1 and looking like a team that could be a Big Ten title contender. So Ohio State, Ryan Day, Chris Holtmann, this is the new blood in the Buckeye Athletic Program, and I think people are going to be happy with both guys for a very, very long time. So be blessed to be a Buckeye fan right now. You've got the program in very good hands, as the basketball program in very good hands, and I think the football program will also be in very good hands with Ryan Day. That is going to wrap it up for the show today. Thank you for listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast. You can find me on Twitter at KYLam8. You can find the show itself on BuckeyeGrove.com every Monday and Friday. Of course, you can follow us rate and review us, on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. Monday we'll be back. We'll have a recruiting update with Mark Gibler. We'll find out the latest with what recruits think of Ryan Day and potentially a new staff. And, of course, we'll talk to Ross and some other folks next week as we also look ahead to the Rose Bowl, Ohio State, and Washington. Thanks for listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, everybody. Have a great weekend. Go Bucks.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.